So on the Ask Me Anything panel, we'll have a clinical nurse specialist, uveitis specialist, 2 of them, both of them who look after children as well as adults. And we have also got a patient expert whose child is affected by uveitis.
Could there be a link between vitamin deficiencies and autoimmune disorders?
Well, I'm not aware of a link between. Oh yeah, sure. So if there is a link between deficit of vitamin and autoimmune disorder. So I'm not aware of a link between deficit of vitamins and autoimmune or autoinflammatory disorders. There is a link for sure between deficit of vitamins and eye disease. For example, deficit of vitamin A can cause eye disease, also, invalidating. But I'm not aware of any autoimmune or autoinflammatory diseases actually caused by deficit of vitamin D, because basically the pathway and the mechanism of autoimmune and autoinflammatory disease are completely different. Usually they are based on a genetic background, and there are some external factors who can basically trigger the disease, but I'm not aware of deficit of vitamins.
Yeah, Lizzie. So are you gonna talk about vitamin D? Go on. You do it. You do it. You do it. You do it. No, you do it.
Hello, I'm Lizzie. I was speaking earlier about the microbiome. What we know is that some vitamin deficiencies, particularly vitamin D deficiency, is associated with an increased risk of developing some autoimmune diseases, such as rheumatoid arthritis and also multiple sclerosis. So if you have a vitamin D deficiency, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will get an autoimmune disease, but if you have deficiencies in vitamin D, it is associated with an increased risk. So taking a vitamin D supplementation, it's not going to be a bad thing or a good thing, but it is one of the things that we know when it comes to vitamins. They're associated with differences in your immune response, and therefore in some people also to do with genetics, then the risk of developing these kind of different diseases. But I actually don't know about uveitis, and hopefully now, yeah.
So yeah, everyone's right. So the data doesn't exist to suggest that if you're we're focusing on vitamin D because the most of the data is around vitamin D. The data doesn't exist to properly correlate low vitamin D and uveitis, but I completely echo Lizzie's statements. So there is actual national guidance. It's kind of unusual that this country issues national guidance on what you should take. There's national guidance on taking vitamin D for adults and children. So everybody should just be on it. And if your vitamin D level is low, it's very low hanging fruit. So I tend to treat, you'll get different doctors doing different things, but I tend to treat low vitamin D below 50 because it's unlikely to cause any problems and it might help. And it's just national guidance anyway.
We have a question from online. It says, my daughter's eye color changes. She is 12. How unusual is this related to uveitis?
So there are some kind of uveitis that can be associated with a change in the color of the eye. And this is because basically we call this iritis. This means inflammation of the iris, which is basically the color part of the eye. So there are some conditions that basically are associated to a damage of the tissue of the iris. And this basically causes a sort of depigmentation. And so it can be associated with a different color, of a change in color in one of the eye and in a different color between the two eyes. And yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
Lily has had uveitis in her left eye since she was 3, and maybe iritis. We asked a previous ophthalmologist why they were different colours, and they said the steroid would have caused it, but perhaps it was iritis. Anybody who wants to look, you can have a look.
So everybody has pigment, like your hair or your skin, behind the coloured bit of your eye. So the thickness of that layer of dark pigment is different in different people. So if you've got very dark skin, very dark hair, then that you'll have a really thick layer of pigment and you'll have brown to darker brown eyes. And as your iris gets inflamed, it sheds pigment, but usually in a way that's not perceptible to the human eye. One of the slightly weird things about eye color is that you notice it more when you talk to somebody than I do looking down a microscope at people. So people often say, oh, I've got one eye one color, one eye the other color, and I look at them in the microscope and I say it looks the same. And then you sort of take a step back and then you see it. So it's sort of an interesting observation, but it doesn't actually have any correlation to how bad your uveitis is or whether something terrible is going to happen to your vision or not. It's more sort of a side feature of the inflammation.
This is the last question we have on paper. It says, have you looked into food intolerance and autoimmune responses?
So yes, I'm looking also to support from the rest of the panel. But autoimmune responses, so one of the classic ones, celiac disease, is not an autoimmune response, but we know that our body, if you have celiac, which is a very specific kind of intolerance, that you can get a reaction to gluten antibodies that can then lead to inflammation in the gut. But when we talk about food intolerances, that's a very specific example. But, you know, people talk about different kinds of things which will affect your diet, but there isn't really that much data correlating particular intolerances with inflammatory diseases. But I think that that would be a fascinating area of research. But yeah, I don't know if anybody else has any other comments.
I think it's something that parents ask us a lot. It's not, that's a very common query for whoever asked the question. And so I would actually keep asking that question over the years, because while we don't have a strong feeling that, you know, if you're allergic to peanuts, you're more likely to get X, Y, or Z. I think that is an area that loads of people are really interested in researching at the moment, and more data will come to light around that. So it's a good question, and you're unlikely to get a particularly helpful answer one way or the other, I think, at the moment from medical professionals, because we just don't know. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that, the more that we have questions that the patients ask, the more we can make sure that the research we then do is relevant to the patient. Because I think people have a feeling, right? They have an idea. We're just in the pathologists in the lab, but these feelings that people have, that these questions get asked a lot, the more you ask them, the more we like the research to be shaped to make sure it's patient relevant. So hopefully if people ask enough, then we do the research, and then we can tell you maybe something more vague in 5 to 10 years. But, it's really important that we make sure the research is patient relevant. And the way to do that is to keep on asking your questions, and hopefully it feeds to all the team. So
parents ask a lot about anti-inflammatory diets, and I know Jamie's got his hand up here. So hang on, we'll get the mic.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to ask, is there any correlation between the anti-inflammatory diet or foods which are considered anti-inflammatory and its effect on uveitis?
I don't know about uveitis, but there have been some studies about rheumatoid arthritis and lupus to look at how anti-inflammatory diets, but those diseases are associated with an increased risk of developing some cardiovascular disease, so heart disease in older people. So it's also important for you to have particular diets just because of managing that risk. I don't know about the association with uveitis, but there is some trials, but we don't really do interventional trials. So as far as I know, I don't know in uveitis, but there is some studies in other disorders that are autoimmune in presentation.
But we don't suggest children going on gluten-free diets without small bowel biopsies. Yeah, we don't do that before they're diagnosed with celiac disease. And Professor Brogan in rheumatology always suggests live yogurt, if that's helpful to anyone. I know he really endorses yogurts. Yeah.
So the only data we have on diet right now is that the healthy diet for the average child is the same as a healthy diet for a child with uveitis. So avoiding ultra-processed foods and avoiding processed foods with lots of sugar in them. There's also another dietary supplement that somebody will be using, so turmeric. So turmeric, it's an ancient medicine. Almost certainly there is something there The problem we have right now is turmeric, the active agent inside it is curcumin, I can never say it properly. And it's only about 3% of the turmeric you ingest that actually does you any good. There's still a real challenge in getting as much of the active agent outside turmeric as you need for your body. So we think you need about 1 gram a day minimum of curcumin to see any benefit, but probably between about 5 and 8 grams a day. And at that rate, quite a lot of people, so 1 in 3 people get stomach pains and stomach cramps, more than on methotrexate, for example, and also there's a chance of heart arrhythmias as well. So there's almost something in turmeric. However, in order to get enough of it to have a positive impact on your body, you are going to make yourself quite sick taking it. And they're working incredibly hard to get an active agent out of it. But it is a shame because it'll be, low cost, potentially low risk, but it's not looking that way just yet. It's a promising area.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. There is no contraindication, so you can get the COVID vaccination and the methotrexate. It's absolutely fine. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you want to do a bit about what vaccines we can and can't have in this fashion?
Oh, that's complicated, isn't it? And I know the vaccine committee in rheumatology are looking at this, obviously, with live vaccines for the younger children, particularly the preschool children. And there's some specific criteria around that. I don't think that really is anybody in the room in that category. But obviously, we all suggest that it's only killed vaccine, the inactivated vaccine. But the COVID vaccines and the boosters should all be given. Yeah, and the new polio as well. There's obviously the inactivated version.
We had one question earlier online, which was about when, not a comment really, as in it would have been really good to know about a lot of this early on. And I just wondered, starting with Hayley, if we maybe could pass the microphone around and just get some input from people in the audience as to when, and if you want to talk, you don't have to, but when you would have wanted to get the information. So it'd be really interesting to hear from you. Hayley, is that right? We start with you and go around.
Yeah, no, sure. It's a hard one because right at the beginning, when you're first diagnosed, it's a lot of information to take in, and everyone goes home and they Google what uveitis is. So I suppose right at the beginning, you need the basics, but then you just, like now, today is just amazing. You've got all these experts here that can absolutely help you. And I suppose it's probably after, for me, it was when he started coming out of the first flare. That's when I wanted to ask all the questions and get more information, because I was actually more able to take more information. And at the time, he was doing hourly drops and stuff. You're just trying to put out the fire, I suppose, for me. So it's probably after the first flare, I'd need more information.
I'll give it upside down. It's very clever. No,
probably as soon as possible for me. Like to know stuff. If I'm panicking, then I just want as much knowledge as I can possibly get. And it's better to be informed properly by professionals than find stuff on the internet. I found a mortality rate for JIA when I first looked it up, so that wasn't ideal.
I was very overwhelmed when I first first had the diagnosis. So for me, it wouldn't have helped having so much more information, even to the point that I felt I wasn't taking all the information at the appointments because my head was, I was in shock. So for me personally, we're coming up to a year after, about 10 months after diagnosis. This is perfect for me. This is really, I want to know as much as possible, but it's only in the last few months that I felt ready to be in this position.
Yeah, I echo them comments, and I thought the YouTube videos are, real helpful. And I don't know, we didn't know what to ask.
For me personally, I would like to get as more information as possible, and I think I did when Liliana got into Great Ormond Street Hospital for the first time. We got leaflet explaining at least basics about uveitis. And I think if I didn't get it, the person I am, I would go to Google and read all the terrible things, like the worst scenario. So I think it's a good idea to give quite a good amount of information. Yeah. Okay.
I think I would agree. I think having quite a range of information to start with is useful, and the YouTube videos, because it makes it just very clear without being too sort of technical and medical. So I think that would be very useful. And actually just being able to be part of the unicorns has been this has just been an amazing day. And I think all this sort of support in this kind of first year is really helpful. So yeah. Thank you.
I think generally the information we had from the consultants was pretty good and at the right time. So we felt like we did know enough at the right stage. I'd say probably access to do it fairly early on once it's diagnosed is best.
Yeah, today's been fantastic, and being able to learn so much. I think this session's been fantastic, been brilliant. So our son, he was 4. So we didn't when he was diagnosed. Things before he was diagnosed, we didn't actually know what uveitis was, so we didn't know what to look out for, because he can't communicate that to us because he was it was before school. So I think going forward, what would be awesome would be to have for the general public to be aware, to find out what uveitis is, so people are aware of what to look out for. And I think Lola very kindly pointed out to me that actually opticians appointments, as you said, are free and available for younger kids. And I think a lot of people maybe not so aware of that, but that would have been something which I wish I knew years ago.
So today has been absolutely amazing, and we're really, really grateful to have met lots of different people and hear different stories. But I do just have a question, if that's okay. So if the inflammation is inactive, this is kind of related to a question earlier about when can you come off it? If it is inactive, is it bad to keep taking medication for it? Or is it okay to still keep taking medication if there aren't any signs of inflammation?
So the problem is that even if the disease, the uveitis or the arthritis is inactive, this means that basically if you stop the medication, you can have more harm in another attack of arthritis or of uveitis, comparing to the risk or the harm in taking the medication. Because if you stop your medication because your uveitis is fine, and then you have a quite severe attack, then the attack can cause some complication that can be basically bad for the vision, okay? So sometimes it's better to continue to take the medication to prevent potential attack that can cause a big reduction in vision. After 2 years, we tried to stop because we have some data that basically demonstrated that after 2 years of inactivity, the immune system has been, we can say, modulated enough to see if stopping the medication, we have no recurrence of inflammation. But stopping the medication after just a few months because the uveitis is inactive can basically be more dangerous, because then you can have another attack and you don't know how severe and how basically dangerous will be for the vision of the kid.
Thank you.
So was that question also slightly to do with the stopping trials as well? Because so that there's a trial looking at when to stop drugs. And so as a medical community, we're really bad at that. We're really good in medicine in general at saying, here's a problem, let's find a drug to fix it. And then let's compare that drug against a placebo, so against nothing, and see if it's better than nothing, or see if it's better than the other drug that we use. We're good at that. What we're really bad at is figuring out when to stop drugs. And so there are trials, and some of you may have been approached to take part in an adalimumab stopping trial, which looks at if you've been stable for a year, are you safe to stop the adalimumab? And in that trial, people who've been stable for 1 year get randomized to either placebo or the drug itself, and it looks the same. You don't know whether you're injecting water or the drug. and we monitor you really closely, and we see what happens over that year of the trial. The other thing that that particular trial is looking at is that if you stop and flare up and restart, does the adalimumab work as well the second time round, which was Ilaria's point, that actually you are in a good place if you're quiet on your drugs. And when you come off your drugs, you at least want to be, you need your doctors to be able to convince you that the drugs that were working before will work the second time round. And there is some observational data, which is not good data, but it's sort of things that we have noticed over time that suggest that when you stop one of these anti-TNF drugs, so adalimumab or infliximab, potentially when you restart them, they're less effective because your immune system is primed to it. And so all of a sudden your immune system goes, oh, I've seen that before, and mounts a massive sort of anti-inflammatory response against the drug. So that's part of what that trial is trying to figure out.
Obviously, my doctor was amazing. Obviously, my doctor was amazing. And I just wanted to say it's really good. And I think if information was given to you like in a YouTube video and you sat down with your doctor and you watched it, and then maybe if you had any questions, like they could answer it for you, and then it would be extremely clear and it could really help. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think the original question was about the information, and for me, I would have preferred to have a lot more information to start with. I think because it has been quite a difficult year and we weren't prepared for things, and I wasn't prepared for the significant impact it would have on us as a family unit with regards to schooling, my work, obviously like a fundamental thing about the injections, but people seem to overlook. And it's been really quite difficult, I feel, for Livy to get used to having an injection, which is quite a fundamental thing with regards to this medication, and to get support around that I felt was really quite difficult. There was a time, and I'm sure if you don't mind me saying it, it was quite a few hours before we try and get to have the injections because of the fear of it, the pain levels, the I'm angry, I don't want to have this, it's not kind of fair scenario. So I think the kind of like these emotional support and the impact it have on the family just needs to be explored a little bit more with regards to the information.
It's worth bearing in mind that that's a very helpful comment. Thank you. And I think one that a lot of people can definitely relate to. Primary support should be through the GP, but some specific psychological interventions, like around injection management, might be available through the secondary care that you go to, so through rheumatology or through ophthalmology, in whichever hospital you go to. So you should ask your local team, and you should say, you know, my child is having a problem with injections, there's fear of injections, the anticipation, the nausea, whatever it is there a local injection support service, either through psychology or something else that would be available to me? I think that's a reasonable question to ask your local team. Sadly, in some places, the answer may be no, but unless you ask, you don't find out.
And we've got, oh yeah, there are groups on Facebook, thank you. That's true. Yeah, I didn't mention that because they're not spaces for professionals, they're spaces for families only, but there are a couple of Facebook groups. It's problematic as Facebook is. They're clearly helpful to people who are members of those groups. There's another question online, or comment online. Laura, thank you very much for posting that because we haven't touched on that yet. The RNIB, the Royal National Institute for the Blind charity, have been helping Laura and her family because they have a visual impairment course online with similar families. So we haven't touched on the additional support that might be available for children whose vision is poor because of uveitis or because of any cause. So there are two levels of vision impairment. One is you can only get halfway down that chart that we will show you at the beginning of the consult of the visit to your clinic. And that's moderately vision impaired, which is still quite bad, vision worse than driving, for example. Because the driving level is about 3 lines up the chart. Worse than that, you can't drive in the UK. And the next severe level of vision impairment is not being able to see even the top letter on the chart that we show you in clinic. And children who get to those levels can be certified as having a vision impairment, and they can get extra support in the community. But even those children with less severe types of vision impairment can get support via different pathways. So classically, you can only formally get the support if both your eyes are affected. But even with one affected eye, although legally you could drive, you still might notice that your lifestyle, your life is a bit impacted by that level of vision change. And the informal pathways are through charities like the Royal National Institute of the Blind. Your SENCO teacher at your school should also be able to help you access additional support at school, even with just vision loss on the one eye. Also, your eye clinic liaison officer, whichever eye hospital, that's an ECLO, eye clinic liaison officer, will link you in to any support in the community for children and young people with vision impairment. And there's also a really cool charity that's called the Royal Society for Blind Children. Physically, it's London-based. They've got a lot of family networks throughout England in particular. There's another network for Scotland. So again, we'll put these things, this learning into an info dump pack we send around to everyone. But thanks, Laura, for getting us to talk about that. And I hope that's useful to you online as well. I just don't think there are any questions left.